Hello, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to the 10th meeting of the CSG National Long-Term Care Workforce Network. My name is Sean Sloan. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Council of State Governments, national headquarters here in Lexington, Kentucky, where we're having a bit of a relapse of winter today, hence the sweater. It has been a while since we last joined you, all the way back in November. So I have a few things to catch you up on before we dive into our main topic. So here is the agenda for today's meeting. I'll have some introductions and a bit of a project recap for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Then we will delve into the topic of multi-sector plans for aging. Dr. Carrie Graham is joining us. She is the Director of Aging and Disability Policy at the Center for Healthcare Strategies. Since 2021 or so, CSCS has been leading learning collaboratives to help states advance their multi-sector plans for aging. We're also going to hear from a couple of folks who have led efforts to develop MPAs in their respective states. Kevin Hancock is a special advisor to the Pennsylvania Secretary of Aging. He's going to tell us about Aging Our Way PA. And we have Rob Ence, the executive director of the Utah Commission on Aging. He'll talk about Utah's MPA, which is called Utah for All Ages. Later on, they will all take your questions, and we encourage you to make use of the Q&A and chat functions here in Zoom. Before we adjourn, I will tell you about our next network meeting, which is coming up at the end of April. Just a quick recap of how we got here. In 2022, with the support of the Commonwealth Fund, CSG created an 8-state task force that guided us in the development of our long-term care policy guide, published in early 2023. One of the 3 focus areas we had for that project, which corresponds to one of the chapters in the guide, was revitalizing the direct care workforce and supporting family caregivers. Last year, again, with the support of the Commonwealth Fund, we spun off that workforce focus into a project of its own. We've expanded that 8-state task force into a national network of state policymakers and stakeholders that you are all part of if you are on our mailing list and if you are joining us today. We have about 500 or more folks on that mailing list now. We have a website, our National Online Resource Center, which uses that section of the policy guide I mentioned to highlight numerous examples of state policies going on around the country. And we are able to offer technical assistance to states that are interested in exploring ways to address long-term care workforce needs. This is where you will find the website, which we have recently updated to include not only the bills and initiatives from the policy guide, but also many that were enacted in 2023. I mentioned that we've been offering technical assistance to states that are working on these issues. Early last month, I was in Springfield, Illinois, and gave about a 30-minute presentation to the House Human Services Committee, chaired by Representative Anna Moeller. And late last month, I was in Honolulu to participate in a long-term care summit there. Hawaii was one of the 8 states on our task force in 2022. So we have been working with many of those folks for quite some time, and it was great to finally meet many of them in person. This is our friend, Senator Sharon Moriwaki, who was one of the instigators of this great event. She is holding up a document entitled The Long-Term Care Plan for Hawaii's Older Adults, a First Step in Balanced Care. That document is dated July 1988. So Hawaii has been working on these issues for quite some time. As part of this day-long summit, which was primarily aimed at stakeholder groups from around the islands, I gave my presentation on state strategies to revitalize the long-term care workforce. And these will be familiar to those who have read our policy guide. Each of these also corresponds to a page on our website where you will find many examples of these state strategies in action. I was also pleased to moderate a panel with state officials from California, Minnesota, and Washington State who joined us virtually. B. Rector from Washington focused on how her state has worked to move individuals out of nursing homes and into preferred home and community-based settings. Elsewhere on the program, she also highlighted the WA Cares Fund, the state's social insurance program. Natasha Mers from Minnesota highlighted what allowed her state to achieve a #1 ranking on AARP's LTSS state scorecard in 2023. She suggested that some of the things Minnesota was lauded for have been points of emphasis in her state's multi-sector plan for aging, which is called Age Friendly Minnesota. And Sarah Steenhausen from California highlighted how that state's multi-sector plan for aging, which is called California for All, has conceptualized LTSS system change across areas like navigation of services, access to programs and services, financing, and workforce. We had breakout sessions during which attendees could brainstorm ideas based on what they'd heard about what other states are working on in long-term care financing, in workforce, and in system transformation. Senator Moriwaki and Representative Corey Chun outlined the ambitious legislative agenda they have for this session, which includes a bill to develop an MPA for Hawaii, another measure to assess the needs of the long-term care workforce in the state, and one to establish a family caregiver tax credit. The folks in Hawaii recognize that not all of these may make it across the finish line this year. You may have seen that last week the Hawaii House of Representatives approved $1 billion to cover the Maui wildfire costs and rebuild the community of Lahaina. So there are competing fiscal concerns there. Here's the deal, though. Another purpose of bringing this group together in Honolulu last month was to enlist champions and gather commitments to working on these issues for as long as it takes to transform Hawaii's long-term care system. Hopefully, it won't be another 35 years, but these pictures are from a follow-up briefing for legislators that took place the day after the summit, and attendees could add their name and organization to these paper flowers and pin them to a diagram of a Hawaiian lei to demonstrate their commitment to the kapuna, the honored elders of Hawaii. You can read more about Hawaii's Long-Term Care Summit on the CSG website. If you go to csg.org and scroll to the bottom of the page to the latest, you should see it there. Please get in touch if you have any questions about the event in Honolulu, or if you'd like to like CSG to participate in a long-term care summit in your state. So that is story time for me for today. So without further ado, we want to dive into our main topic for today, multi-sector plans for aging. And these have come up in a number of different contexts on previous webinars, which, by the way, are now all archived on our website. So I'm excited, though, that we are finally getting around to highlighting MPAs specifically. I want to welcome Dr. Carrie Graham. She is Director of Aging and Disability Policy at the Center for Healthcare Strategies. As I mentioned at the top, she oversees the learning collaboratives that CHCS leads to help states advance their multi-sector plans on aging. She's going to provide an overview of what she and her team have learned and introduce us to a couple of folks who have worked on MPAs in Pennsylvania and Utah. Carrie, welcome.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for having me. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about multi-sector plans for aging and what they are, how they're different than other plans, and how a couple of those have been used for direct care workforce. And then obviously Rob and Kevin from Utah and Pennsylvania will talk about how they've really focused on direct care workforce in their state. So I'm Carrie Graham. I'm Director of Aging and Disability Policy at the Center for Healthcare Strategies. And I have a colleague on today who's part of our MPA team, which is Shira Moffett, who's a Senior Program Officer helping to lead this effort, and want to acknowledge the rest of my team listed here on the slide. Next slide, please. I come from Center for Healthcare Strategies, where I mentioned I'm the Director of Aging and Disability Policy. We're a policy design and implementation partner, which is, kind of a fancy way of saying kind of a consulting firm in a way, but we're not for profit, mission driven. And we work with all 50 states, especially in our team working with state stakeholders and state policymakers to improve outcomes for older adults. This is an LTSS, an integrated care for dual eligibles, family caregiving, direct care workforce, and multi-sector plans for aging. Next slide, please. So to give you a sense of the work that has been done to promote multi-sector and support multi-sector plans for aging, before I came to CHCS, I was a consultant to California's Master Plan for Aging, and worked in the first development of that plan, the first version of that plan, and all the stakeholder engagement and the cross-agency and cross-sector planning. And then I came to CHCS, and when I came, they were back then conducting kind of survey of states to see who might be other states that might be interested in MPAs and who's done them and all of that. And the results of that was that we got funding from West Health, May and Stanley Smith Charitable Trust, and the SCAM Foundation to do our first cohort of states in an MPA learning collaborative. So we had our first 10 states back then. They're all at different phases of, some were just kind of conceiving of and getting buy-in for a plan and figuring out what it was. Some were actually developing a plan. And Colorado was sort of revising a current plan that they had. And then we had a second cohort. So we're currently in our second cohort with another 10 states. And again, Rob and Kevin, who are here from Utah and Massachusetts, are part of that second cohort. And all at different phases. We've had a lot of states who are part of this, both cohorts now having developed their plan or gotten executive orders. Also, right now, I'll be showing you a map of different states that are doing MPAs, but it's always sort of like people are doing stuff in different states that we don't know about. So we're actually just about to field a 50-state survey for states to say, are you doing this? Are you interested in this? Where are you in the process? So if you get a link to do that, if you're from a state and you get that from CHCS, please do it. So next slide, please. So what is a multi-sector plan for aging? I'm trying to make the case here. They're different than other plans. They usually encompass other plans like age-friendly or state plans on aging. But here's like 6 things that are a little different about them. First of all, they're state-led. Usually an MPA is authorized through legislation or a governor's executive order, or maybe a more informal decree or mentioning it in the State of the State address. So it's sort of authorized by the state and led by the state. It is a plan that is cross-agency, and this is really important. So during development of the plan, there might be an agency or a department or an office that is leading it, like the Unit on Aging or Medicaid agency. But it is about working across all different kinds of departments and agencies within a state that are working on aging. And I would say that almost all are. So transportation, housing, social services, public health. So really working across both and developing it. And then when you have a plan with a bunch of initiatives and recommendations in it, that different agencies actually take accountability for those. The third thing about, and in the cross agency, I'd say if a certain agency or department already has a plan, like a public health, rural aging plan or healthy aging plan, or a state plan on aging, that those are encompassed. That work has already been done. Those are encompassed within a master plan. The third thing is that they're very led and engaged by stakeholders and consumers. So throughout the development process and then in implementation, stakeholders and consumers are engaged, are asked to weigh in, as well as, in the usual sort of aging and disability advocates, but also stakeholders who may not be traditionally focused on aging. People who are employers, industries, emergency preparedness, every state tries to engage stakeholders that are really a broad representation of their state. And so number 4 sort of applies to all, which is a broad focus on aging throughout the lifespan. So MPA is not about, this is the pot of money we have for people who are currently this age and older. It is about a broad focus on aging through the lifespan with this idea that we're all aging. We're all planning for aging, hopefully. We have caregivers, people with disabilities who are aging, direct care workers, providers, young people planning for retirement, and that all can be encompassed in a state's plan. They're data driven. So, when you're kind of trying to make the case, we need this, states often use data to kind of say, look at how our demographics are changing. They're data driven in terms of deciding what kind of initiatives and things to put in a plan. And they're data driven in that there's often sort of accountability and benchmarks. that a plan has, and I'll show you an example of that later. And then they're a living document. It's not a document that has a begin date and an end date. Usually there's a progress report every year, and every couple of years revising and refreshing, because the world changes and things change, and the stakeholder process is ongoing, and it should not be a plan that sits on a shelf. Next slide. So what MPAs are not? They're not a budget document. They're not, a document saying we're applying funding to these things. They are about priorities that the state, the governor, the legislature, the stakeholders, consumers have all come together and said, yes, this is what we want for our state. This is where we want to go. Many of the things that are in an MPA can be funded. They could be having gone on for a decade and they're being highlighted in the MPA, but they can also include aspirational things like, we would love to get to a place here where all older adults have these kinds of services. They're not a state plan, a state health improvement plan, a state Medicaid plan, but they should absolutely, if your state has a dementia-friendly work task force that has created initiatives and recommendations, that work is done. Those should be in your plan. So it really gathers up if your state's a age-friendly state. If there are age-friendly health system initiative going on in their state, all of that through the stakeholders and any active plan should be included, and that just makes it easier, and it lifts up everything else that has been going on. It doesn't recreate the wheel. As I said, it's not a plan for just people who are old now, and they're typically not called multi-sector plans for aging. Next slide, please. So here's some fun names. Every state gets to make their plan their own. States are not like age-friendly stuff comes in with 8 domains that you follow. States come up with their own domains, and they come up with their own name that oftentimes, reflects kind of maybe a tagline of the governor or something that really resonates with the culture and the people of their state. So Longevity Ready Maryland, Utah for the Ages you're going to hear about, multi-sector blueprint for age-friendly Minnesota. So anyway, North Dakota multi-generational plan for aging. We love that one. So anyway, there's all different kinds of names, and states create their own kind of fun names for their plans. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of the national movement here, the orange states are states that have an MPA. It's been developed. They have their initiatives and recommendations. It meets a lot of the 6 criteria in that it's cross-department, it's stakeholder engaged, it's all these sorts of things. The states in the dark blue are ones that have authorization, legislation, executive order, and they're in the process of developing their plan. And then the blue states are fostering development and different stages of getting buy-in and gathering people to do this kind of a plan. Now, they're, like I said, if you're from a state and you're like, Carrie, our state's fostering development and it's not in blue, we're doing this 50-state survey because oftentimes we don't know. And it's moving so fast. So lots of people engaging in, lots of states engaging in this. Next survey, next slide. This is just an example. This is an example from North Dakota. So what a state normally does when they get on this train is that they come up with, they work with their stakeholders, they work across agencies to come up with a few domains. Here, North Dakota has come up with services closer to home, futures planning, social engagement and accessibility, and workforce. And within that goal, they then work in the development to come up with a goal that all the agencies, that the stakeholders and consumers can all see themselves in and agree upon. So in workforce, their goal that they came up with through this iterative process was North Dakotans will enjoy ready access to quality services through targeted efforts to attract and retain a qualified workforce. Then what they're going to do is they're going to start working on what those initiatives and recommendations would be to get North Dakota there. Next slide, please. remember I said every state kind of creates their own? Well, this is just an example of California's 5 domains and 5 big goals. So their goal in around direct care workforce was caregiving that works, is what they called their domain. And their goal was, we will be prepared for and supported through the rewards and challenges of caring for aging loved ones. A lot of what is included in there is both professional workforce and family workforce initiatives. So every, and if you look at these, they're kind of talking about similar things to North Dakota, right? I mean, but they each gives the flavor of their state. So you see how this is something that is really new for a state and can reflect their values and the way they talk about things. So next slide, please. And this is kind of just a structure. Like, let's say you were working on goal 2, LTSS, and you had your goal be, the goal is people in our state will have access to the services and supports they need to live and age well in our state. So you've developed that with your stakeholders. The first row here, what state government departments, agencies, and legislature would you work on here for LTSS? You would engage, on aging, Medicaid agency, Department of Rehabilitation, labor agency. So you'd first start by going out and engaging anybody who's even tapping into LTSS in the state. You would then move down one row, engage external stakeholders who care about and know a lot about LTSS, including AARP, labor unions, people who use LTSS, academics who research LTSS. You engage those stakeholders. Then you go and you start gathering and mapping out what are the existing programs, initiatives, plans, active, like for direct care workforce, what is happening? What does their state use ARPA money for in terms of direct care workforce? And you kind of map out and read all of these plans and look for the similarities between anything else happening in the state. And then you might go and start mining your data. What is our data on this topic? How can we make the case for the fact that we need to include it, the fact that, what we need to include, and then what would be a benchmark for measuring progress if we're implementing it. So that just gives you a sense of like what a state goes through when they develop their MPA. Next slide, please. These are just some examples after going through that process of what California came up with in the direct care workforce space. Some of these were very general goals about promoting innovative models for community health workers. And if you see this lead agency working at the Health and Human Services Agency and a totally different agency, Labor and Workforce Development Agency, are both co-leading this. So you can see how every initiative that a state comes up with can be co-led and accountability. So just giving you an example of how all of that turns into actual initiatives. Next slide, please. And this is like a data dashboard. These are some of the things that California did to sort of just put data out there on direct care workforce. They made a visualization on the number of paid caregivers per 1,000 adults 65 and older in the state and made this heat map. And so for a lot of the different initiatives, they have, these kind of heat maps and maybe a benchmark. Next slide. So that's it. And I'm going to hand it off to Rob. These are some, some resources we have online. We created a lot of how-to tools that you're welcome to look at. And now I'm going to introduce Kevin Hancock, who has done some incredible work in Pennsylvania for Aging Our Way PA, which is the name we love. And walked through all the steps of creating this amazing. I mean, it's an MPA, but they call it Aging Our Way. So I love it. I'm handing it off to Kevin now.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks for such a great presentation, a great foundational presentation for a lot of the effort. Pennsylvania followed and tracked very closely to a lot of the guidance and the approach that was recommended by the Center for Healthcare Strategies. And I have to say and go on record that we are incredibly grateful for their continued support as we developed our plan in a pretty aggressive time frame. As Carrie had mentioned, our plan in Pennsylvania is called Aging Our Way PA, a plan for lifelong independence. This name was selected by stakeholders, and it reflected a lot of what we heard in very extensive listening sessions across the state, which were both virtual and in person, where people want to maintain as much independence as possible. So when we get to discussing our priorities, that'll highlight why this name is significant. So if you go to the next slide, this provides a little bit of background for our approach. Pennsylvania has a history of taking these types of initiatives to our stakeholders. We did that when we moved our Medicaid-funded long-term care system to managed care, and we took the stakeholder approach with the development of our 10-year strategic plan. We worked with our aging network in Pennsylvania pretty extensively. In fact, our 52 area agencies on aging across the state were primarily responsible for facilitating the in-person listening sessions. Pennsylvania has 67 counties. We were able to have an in-person listening session in every one of those counties, and we sought to make sure that we were as expansive as possible, not only geographically, but with the different and varied demographic populations we have in our state as well. And we really looked to make sure that we had as much diverse and broad-based input as possible. We did use the authority that Carrie had touched upon with an executive order. Our Governor Shapiro, who took office in 2023, signed Executive Order 2023-09, his 9th executive order directing the Department of Aging in Pennsylvania and agencies under the governor's jurisdiction to participate in this process and to develop the 10-year strategic plan. And he gave us a very aggressive timeline. He really wanted it to be published in the first quarter of 2024, and we are on track to do that at this point. We have focused on making sure that the plan was not only comprehensive, but also achievable, which means that every single initiative we have in the plan that we call a tactic, every single tactic will be measurable, and those measures will define how well the state is performing compared to what was the goal to be achieved, and also to reflect the progress of the plan or what needs to be changed. Because, as Carrie mentioned, our plan will be a living document, and we expect it to change pretty frequently over the next 10 years. Responsive means that we are going to continue to allow the plan to evolve over time or to change dramatically with an emergent event, like what we experienced with the public health emergency related to COVID-19. We really do want the plan to change when it needs to change, but we also want to make sure that we're achieving the goals that are set because they're incredibly important and important to our stakeholders. We want to make sure that the plan is identifying areas of improvement and areas where investment is needed to be able to address the needs and preferences of older adults. And last but certainly not least, we want to make sure that the plan is as efficient and as effective as possible, which means that we know that there are finite resources and we know that there are competing resources to improving infrastructure and services for older adults. So we want to make sure that we're as efficient as possible with any of the resources we're given to be able to improve the service system. So if you go to the next slide, this shows you a little bit about our outreach approach. As mentioned, we took a direct engagement approach with stakeholders where we asked stakeholders in 210 in-person listening sessions, as well as many virtual listening sessions, and also the submission of public comments to tell us what they want to see included and what should be priorities. From that outreach, we received over 10,000 responses that were very varied. I love saying those two words together. We really did get a comprehensive set of responses from stakeholders. In addition to that, direct outreach, we also conducted a needs assessment survey, which was our approach to program evaluation. We recognize the program evaluation has to be central to the development of a strategic plan, as it always is. Our approach was doing a needs assessment survey, which was a structured survey, asking stakeholders to answer questions that were tailored to elicit responses that were reflective of what they would like to see as priorities as part of this process. So approximately 18,000 responses across from representatives across the state, and the primary responders in this process were older adults, individuals age 60 and over, and caregivers, family caregivers, and informal and formal caregivers through this process, which is really what we wanted. We wanted people who would be most affected by the work of this plan to be the most significant respondents through this process. So if you go to the next slide, this shows how we framed that outreach. We used the domains of livability that was created by the World Health Organization and adapted for the United States by AARP. These 8 domains take a look at a 360-degree perspective on the lives of older adults and older adult caregivers, and they include outdoor spaces and buildings, what the external environments does to affect the lives of older adults and what could be improved. Transportation, which we consider to be the gateway of independence, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Civic participation in employment, which considers pretty significantly volunteerism, older adult employment, and engagement with governments. Communication and information, which relates to the resources that people use to be able to find what they need in the communities where they live. Respect and social inclusion takes into consideration belonging, and that is directly relevant for individuals who have faced marginalization and discrimination in their lives. And that certainly takes into consideration the experience of ageism and ableism. Social participation takes into consideration social isolation and loneliness and what is needed to keep people engaged. Health services and community supports focus pretty heavily on what it will take for people to be able to age in their communities or in place if that's something they wish to be able to do. And last but certainly not least, we talked about housing and what opportunities and barriers that may exist for people to be able to age in community or age in place, and also pretty broadly, what are the challenges that older adults specifically face when it comes to their living environment. So if you go to the next slide, this talks about a little bit about the development process. We did have a steering process in addition to the stakeholder engagement. That steering committee included a legislative council in Pennsylvania called the Long-Term Care Council, as well as subject matter experts from across the state, and all state agencies, including those agencies that are under the governor's jurisdiction, and a panel of subject matter experts. These individuals used all the information that was provided by our stakeholders and then developed the priorities, strategies, and tactics that are included as part of our plan. It was really a pretty significant back and forth process. We asked that steering committee to develop 8 summary reports that were directly aligned with the 8 domains of livability that I had just previously mentioned. And those reports ended up framing what we included as part of the plan. So if you go to the next slide, this graphically represents our process for the development of the plan. We are currently in the second draft phase. So we developed the first draft and we circulated that first draft for validation with that governance group, those subject matter experts and our long-term care council and the government state agencies, just to make sure that the language made sense. And then right now we developed a second draft, and that second draft has been out for public comment since February 2020. And one of my colleagues who's on the phone with me right now, Nathan Lampenfeld, who works pretty heavily with this particular plan and who has had a pretty significant hand in framing out the content from the stakeholder engagement. I'm going to ask him to put in the chat the link to the plan that's out for public comment so you can see it. And you're welcome to submit comments if you have particular ideas. That comment period will be open for 30 days and will end on March 20th. And immediately after the plan, we will be incorporating changes that we have identified, and we'll be then publishing the plan in final, hopefully by the end of March, but if it's in early April, we'll be very close to the goal that the governor set for us in developing the plan in the first quarter of 2024. So if you go to the next slide, slide before. This shows our priorities and our strategies. The 5 priorities that we identified include unlocking access, which is noted here as eliminating barriers that prevent older adults' ability to be able to live healthy and fulfilling lives, which means that this is focused pretty heavily on different types of services that may be able to support the ability for older adults to age well and live life with a significant amount of health, well-being, and quality of life. We have 10 strategies associated with that priority and 25 different tactics. The tactics are the measurable components of the plan. Aging in community really focuses on enabling older adults to maintain secure housing, active community involvement, and living in familiar surroundings. This tactic has 12 strategies and 65 tactics, which is significant, and it's very broad reaching. Aging in community, as you can expect, does take into consideration housing, and housing by far was the area where we heard the most comments. So we really did have to have the plan reflect how much people wanted housing and aging in community to be an emphasis or a component for the plan. Gateways to Independence takes into consideration adults' unhindered mobility and safe, convenient, and autonomous use of transportation. People consider transportation to be the gateway to independence, and we really do want to make sure that transportation is emphasized, along with health and long-term services and supports. Transportation and housing were the 3 biggest areas we heard from stakeholders. Caregiver supports takes into consideration supporting, training, and providing respite and navigation tools for paid and unpaid caregivers. This is the strategy that does really focus on the workforce, and I'm going to touch on that in the next slide. This strategy had this priority had 2 strategies and 6 tactics. That sounds like a lower number, but it's very ambitious, as you'll see here just in a moment. And last but certainly not least is education and navigation, which really does focus on addressing those complex problems that are associated with the experience of the older adult. This may require further research. This may require the development of networks that allow for connectivity for older adults to be able to access the services they need, and also to be able to have the information they need to be able to live their best lives. This particular strategy included this particular priority included 6 strategies and 40 different tactics, and really did focus on navigation and areas of opportunity for research. So now talking about workforce, if you go to the next slide, all of the caregiver supports tactics really did focus in some way, shape, or form on workforce, but that it could be unpaid workforce associated with caregivers, but it certainly did take into consideration the paid workforce. As it turns out, Pennsylvania in 2019 published a blueprint for improving the working conditions of the paid direct care workforce that's involved in long-term services and supports. That blueprints reflected everything that we heard from stakeholders through the development of Aging Our Way PA that we thought needed to be included in the plan. So we really actually did, in 2019, the blueprint was published, but unfortunately, it was postponed in its implementation simply because of the public health emergency. So we decided to amplify those tactics that were associated with that 2019 blueprint and reconfigure it to be part of our Aging Our Way PA plan. That blueprint takes into consideration elevating the direct care workforce through augmented wages, additional training, a career ladder for the direct care workforce, and improving overall working conditions that may include paid time off and benefits. So a heavy focus on using an existing plan and modifying an existing plan to be able to address what we know is a true crisis in Pennsylvania, like it is in every other state across the country. A second area where we're focusing on the workforce is, which is much more long-term, is changing scope of practice laws in Pennsylvania that allow for a lot more flexibility in the work that people do, especially in physical health and long-term services and supports, and in some cases, potentially even with behavioral health to support the needs of older adults. We've found through our stakeholder engagement that many people find that scope of practice laws are very restrictive in Pennsylvania, and flexibility is needed as these services continue to evolve. And the third area that was heavily focused on the workforce is looking for ways to advocate for changes in federal laws to allow for immigration and refugees to be part of the direct care workforce. We believe that an opportunity or a way to address some of the challenges we have with immigration that face barriers at the federal level, especially through federal immigration law, could be a support for some of the challenges we have in recruiting a direct care workforce. We think that immigration could be part of that solution, and we think that if we look for opportunities to engage with our federal partners in having conversations, adult conversations about immigration and how it could be part of the solution instead of continuously being referenced as part of the problem, that it presents an opportunity to address an issue while at the same time solving a pretty significant problem. So these are three examples of areas that we'll be touching on the direct care workforce and for employment and long-term services and supports related challenges. And we do believe we have an opportunity through the plan to elevate the workforce experience. And these are three of over 100 different tactics that will be associated with elevating the condition in the life of older adults. So if you go to the next slide, this gives you a little bit of highlight by year of areas where we'll be focusing on plan impact. Our first year really is focusing on those quick wins. Years 1 through 5 will be refocusing on some of the bigger projects that require a significant amount of restructuring. And the projects that we think will take 10 years are really the transformative tactics that really are meant to change the condition. And once completed, will really elevate the quality of life for older adults across the state. So we do have a roadmap for how these tactics are going to be implemented. Quick wins, broader infrastructure changes, and then the broad transformative projects. But we believe that all of these will be achievable with the right resources and with continuous emphasis from stakeholders that this is what they want to see. While at the same time, we are recognizing that we will leave room for changes if that's something that stakeholders would like to see. Now, if you go to the next slide, this shows again where you would be able to view the plan and its contents, and where you would be able to potentially submit public comments if that's something you would like to do. This plan will be out for public comment until March 20th, 2024. So you have about another week and a half. And we actually a couple more days. Actually, we're running out of time. I lost track of the week. That yesterday was St. Patrick's Day. So you have a few days left to be able to submit plans, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get the plan out in final form in the next couple weeks. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Rob, my colleague from Utah, who's going to walk through the Utah experience in developing your master plan. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kevin. Rob Ence here, the Executive Director of the Utah Commission on Aging. And one of the great opportunities of being involved in a multi-state cohort is meeting individuals like Carrie and Kevin, and to gain an appreciation for the work that is being done by the states, and to affirm the processes that we're all following are not strangely apart from one another. A lot of the things that I am about to share with you will reiterate some of the principles that Carrie talked about and that you saw play out in the thinking and the process for Pennsylvania. I have deep respect for my colleagues and their work, and every time I'm on a call with them, I learn something new. Next slide, please. Commission on Aging was created back in 2004. It is not the state unit on aging for the state of Utah. It sits as a partner and an umbrella over all the agencies that provide services in the community, our public policy sector, including our legislature, and works very closely with our various academic institutions and those doing independent research in the field of aging. In the center of this, what was missing when I took this over in 2016 was a communication strategy that would pull the best of all these things together. And what naturally fell from that was a need to have a coordinated plan. When we ran across the Center for Healthcare Services for the work they were doing on these cohorts, it made sense to apply and become part of this learning collective. And that's what we've been doing now for the past near year, but had started tracking on them in their first year and said, boy, we need to be part of this. There's a lot we can learn, and I think there's some things we could share. Our communication strategy really evolved during COVID and during the pandemic, as so many incidents of isolation and program separation occurred. We had to come up with creative ways to keep people connected. Next slide, please. Every single state deals with a variety of issues to some degree, and the impact of these issues varies depending upon where an individual falls on the independent scale, from being very independent to later on maybe more full dependency. But full dependency can happen at an early age because of a disability or another circumstance. But nevertheless, it is the challenge of juggling all of these things and putting together a strategy that helps us address in a methodical, appropriate way that is also efficient with resources. And as you look at this list, a lot of these things point to one of the greatest issues that we were impacted during COVID, and that was social isolation, which has a great deal of influence on our health, on our mental well-being, and on, preaching to the choir, because you all know that. And this leads also and impacts to the long-term services, care service issues. Next slide, please. So the biggest challenge for the commission to build the coalition around making this happen was to build trust. So for the first several years, there was an intensive effort for the commission to engage and co-sponsor and share listening events, participating in conversations with advisory boards for the different area agencies on aging, work for solutions for volunteer management reporting that would help in the efficiencies that they're required to perform. Resource navigation, that's when it was determined that we would create a virtual resource center for the state of Utah that would either point efficiently to where services are or add and complete the gaps that existed out there. And that ultimately became utahaging.org as our main resource center for the state of Utah for all things aging. We had a chance encounter with an organization called Monami that had some framework done around some of these tools that we were able to incorporate, and are still actually growing our services using some of their platforms. Ultimately, this really helps not only the transfer of information and the connecting of the various information sources, but it also helps in the aggregate reporting requirements from our various AAAs and all the programs that they're involved in. Next slide, please. So after having created these centers of trust, this is where the Virtual Resource Center was created. We have a future call center, navigation center, kind of like a 2-on-1, but very focused on helping people navigate resources as older adults, and also to help fill the literacy buckets where we hope all older adults will be financially literate, literate from a legal standpoint, literate from a healthcare standpoint, and also from a technology standpoint. Those are all the purposes of the internal volunteer program we're building that will help drive a lot of the work of our master plan, but ultimately to help people find and navigate resources effectively. Next slide, please. What you have heard mentioned are what are the key elements to create a master plan. And we did the same. We started actually with a couple of legislators who'd been active on adult issues, older adult issues for a number of years, and who were concerned about issue A or issue B. And I thought, rather than have all these disparate pieces going and providing legislation and an argument for why we need to have these services, and including long-term care services, for example, and why don't we have a conversation about how we build this under an umbrella of aspiration, to build on the work that's been done, to make sure we preserve the things that are working well, and then to fill the gaps and to provide a roadmap for where we need to be in the future. And much like Kevin talked about, this is a dynamic process that rolls forward. Every few years, we start with a 3-year plan and a 10-year horizon, and we roll that forward. So we're always looking and making adjustments as we learn new. This also has to have the stakeholder inclusiveness. The commission has 24 statutory appointed members, including some members of the governor's cabinet, but mostly the sectors, the stakeholders in our community that represent all the various issues, whether they're NGOs, whether they're government agencies, independent businesses. In addition to that, we have about 300 organizations that participate on a regular basis in sharing education, helping with the planning process. And so we, by level, really intend to have and have had a very comprehensive reach over the past several years in the way we've conducted business. We hold summits every quarter, and from that we've derived what we thought would be our core issues out of the broad comprehensive issue bucket that you saw. We know that this has to be driven by rational data. And as Kevin also mentioned, every single one of our tactics has to have measurable outcomes that talks about how we are actually impacting society with the issues that we're putting forward in the plan. Next slide, please. So our draft was available for public comment a couple of months ago. We just closed the first round of that input, and also an opportunity for individuals to sign up and participate in 6 work groups, which will help us and are currently helping us refine what the language that we propose for our tactics and our strategies and what the measurements will be. We're building our framework around results-based accountability and building a dashboard with the tools provided through that organization so that we can report out and track accurately with evidence-based what these programs are doing. And again, it's broad. It's not the specific hands-on in the states, as Carrie talked about. It's actually the aspirational goals and how we our combined efforts are driving this forward. We recently received a letter from the governor as well, which will be a lead piece in our plan. Next slide, please. I apologize for all the writing on this slide. It goes against every rule of PowerPoint that I've ever worked on, but it was a way of showing and drilling down, similar to what Kevin did, is that these are the 6 core areas that we determined. And as an example, starting with creating the ecosystems around age-friendly, whether it's the workplace, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, all of those things, we aspire to that age-friendly designation. AERP is very involved in the designation of age-friendly communities, and Utah, sadly, I have to report, is the only state that does not have any sort of age-friendly designation in any of its communities on a level of the state or county or municipality. We do, however, have now a age-friendly designation at the University of Utah healthcare system, as well as University of Utah as a university. So it's a good step in starting to build what these ecosystems should look like. And then we have Living Well Every Day, and you can see what some of these issues are. I encourage you to visit our website where you can go through the detail. You'll also find a Gantt chart that talks about the dashboard of progress through our plan. But ultimately, if I were to look at one of these down to Live Well Every Day, and go to the next slide, please. Then this takes, for example, one of the 3 core strategies and 8 of the tactics that we're now building our dashboard measurements around. And you'll see in this things that we've been talking about in terms of the policy incentives for geriatric and gerontology trained specialists and rural providers, the adoption of the 4M principles as part of what's important. Forgive me for the spelling on principles, too many quick typing fingers on that one. But basically, to make sure that we're addressing those things for an age-friendly health system as well. And the list goes on, included talking about the kinds of guidelines that need to be in the workforce training for dementia disease management, the kind of expectation and licensure with our Department of Professional Licensing, and on and on. Next slide, please. So the bottom line is where the commission functions now in the middle of all of this work is to basically engage our partners and stakeholders in a variety of things to go around the circle with the Utah Plan for Aging right in the center of this. We have other outlets that we, promote through social media, YouTube channel, our virtual resource center at utahaging.org, and then our navigation hotline, which again, we hope to have active this fall. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you for that very, very fast discussion. That was tough to get in.
Rob, thank you so much, and thanks to Kevin and Carrie as well. I know we got a little bit of a late start, but we want to spend a little time here for any questions that folks might have for our guests today. As I said at the top, you can type a question into the Q&A box, and we will answer as many of those as time allows. One question that I had was this is something I mentioned in my piece about Hawaii. We talked with Sarah Steenhausen from California, and she said that there was at least some skepticism early on in California that the MPA discussion could turn into an academic exercise. And so how do you avoid that and kind of get the buy-in necessary to create a productive process? Was that a challenge that anybody saw in your processes?
I'll start if I may. So I think because this does involve wanting to get your head policymakers for the state, your governor, as well as legislators, you try to find a starting point of common ground and how this overall plan can really help make resources more efficiently utilized, eliminate redundancies in the state, and really convene and pull together. Again, I described how the 24 statutory members, that is in effect our steering committee, and it was by design set up that way. We're just using that group now to full capacity. But one of the legislators said, okay, so you get this document out there, then so what? And that's an important thing. We wanted this to be of a reasonable size so that it would be read and could be referred to and easily adjusted. But unless we have a plan to make sure that those items that we consider our core strategies to be actionable, that we can actually turn that from an idea or a piece of research, that data becomes actionable in the community, and we can demonstrate over time how that's making a difference. And then you, I believe, start to get believers in the group who understand what you're trying to do. I will just say, though, that the work is important to do, even if you don't get 100% legislator buy-in. I can't convince some legislators to do things, no matter how plain it may seem. It's still the right thing to do for the community, and the results should speak for themselves.
And just to describe the Pennsylvania experience, the entities that would describe it from our perspective as academic would have been, to Rob's point, our legislature. We didn't have that experience with our legislature. Our legislature, from the very beginning, when we first started talking about this in March and April, and this is a bipartisan position, they were very supportive of this process. We had early informational hearings before we even had the executive order. And from my perspective, our legislature in Pennsylvania has been a great asset in this process to recognize how important this is, and also to make sure that it's something that, as defined, as being real. And that being said, we did partner with academic institutions to be able to help bring this about, including the distribution of the needs assessment survey. We worked with the University of Pittsburgh, which was also heavily involved in Pittsburgh's age-friendly designation. Pittsburgh's one of the big cities with age-friendly designation from AARP, and they were pretty helpful thought partners and active partners in helping us think through our process, and also where we kind of need to get started. So I contribute, or I attribute the partnership with many entities, including our legislature, academic institutions, and stakeholders across the state, is having this be much more of a real process.
And if I could just say, in California, there was Patty Berg, was an 84-year-old former legislator from Humboldt County who just kept saying, I've been through this process 7 times before. They all just sit on a shelf. And I think the thing that was transformative in California was the cross agency in development It wasn't just a Department of Aging thing or just a public health thing. It was cross-agency. It did not have an end date, so it was like a living document. And it was very clear that the stakeholder process went on. They said stakeholders keep us accountable. And they keep, they keep meeting and they keep looking at the progress, especially through the progress reports and the data dashboard of have we made any progress? And so I think that's what is, has kind of kept it alive and not sitting on a shelf.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions in the Q&A. One, I just lost. So I think that Trishira got in there and responded to it, but from our friend Shirley Gerard, who was asking about whether states are working with those geriatric workforce enhancement programs, the HRSA funded programs. Have those been a part of the processes that you all have seen?
So Utah definitely has been, and we've actually been supportive of legislation that expands the workforce development, not only in rural communities, but specifically towards geriatric training as well. And it's an active annual ongoing effort.
Pennsylvania, it was part of the broader contribution, so I have to say yes as well. It was actually even part of the blueprint that we developed that I had mentioned in 2019. It was actually more part of that development, and we're going to be incorporating and updating that work to be able to address what stakeholders wanted to see with the direct care workforce.
And there was a question in there from our friend Dr. Heibovitz from Levittown, and he's asking, is there anything specific in your plans? I realize the input from the Pennsylvania Long-Term Care Council to the long-term care workforce.
So that would be the blueprint that I had mentioned. That was really, I call it the direct care workforce, but it really was associated with the long-term care direct care workforce. There are challenges. There are challenges in every aspect of the direct care workforce, like child direct care workforce, and other areas where you have individuals performing services under difficult conditions with relatively low wages. But the blueprint that I had mentioned was focused on the long-term care workforce. So yes, absolutely.
I'll just add to that again how important that concept is, I think, for our state as well. I would imagine for all states, but it's not only developing the workforce, but we have a section in our plan that deals with, we've already created a family caregiver guide that was well researched, funded, and is now out there for adoption. But in addition to that, sections on things that need to be done to protect in long-term care settings, the caregivers as well as the patients. And it's looking at issues and policies that have arisen so that it's a complete approach to the long-term care setting. Accessibility, trained workforce, affordable and appropriate business policy around that. And then also making sure that we're protecting the vulnerable adults as well as the caregivers.
And we had a question in here asking about how you all are funding this work. And so Rob and Kevin, maybe you can weigh in on that. And then Carrie, what level of investment is required to sort of get these processes off the ground?
So I would just say that if you'd like to provide information, people are more than welcome to send money to us to help our work. I used to think California had endless resources and realized they got funding issues too. So it's not a novel thing. It's a challenge to convince public policymakers on funding, especially if their ideologies line up with this, the importance of investing in these issues and that it actually does not only better for the families, think of home-based, and waivers and those kinds of things, better for the families, better for the patients, saves the state money in the long run. So there's just sort of that calculus that's sometimes hard to transfer through. But in terms of creating the plan and supporting the plan, if it weren't for our statutory partners who do a lot of work, it would be challenged. We don't have, at this point, we have moral support from the legislature, but not a lot of financial support. And we are and have been seeking grants to implement certain pieces of the work we're doing. But again, it's our partnerships that will help drive the success of this and them sharing the cost burden.
And then for Pennsylvania, it's going to be part of our year-to-year state budget development cycle. We have our year one initiatives that I had mentioned that are really focused on the quick wins. We did a lot of research to identify which required new funding and which could be covered by existing funding, and the tactics that required new funding were part of the governor's budget ask. So we have requests for that funding as part of the development of our 2024-2025 budget. We hope we get it, and that will really be the telling sign for how much people are actually supporting the development of this plan. So it'll be part of our annual budget cycle.
And then, developing it can be hard. In California, they are blessed with a bunch of regional foundations that contributed to help and consultants, including me at the time, who helped put it together and run stakeholder meetings. But a lot of the actual work on development was, stakeholders who came in and sat on subcommittees, and they would then write a report to the state saying, these are the things that we'd like in the MPA to address this goal. So a lot of stakeholders and advocates and providers who are on those committees did the work in kind. So there was foundation funding. And then the kind of interesting is when you're implementing, if you put out a document saying stakeholders, state, governor, legislature has agreed on this thing, we'd like to see this done in our state, then you start seeing funders and people saying, oh, well, we'd have support for that. Let's do that, whether we're an industry or a philanthropy or something like that. So it is quite a pull for funding once you get it done as well. There is a Grant Makers in Aging has an MPA funding community that is a bunch of foundations and philanthropy who are interested in being sort of matched with states who might want certain kinds of funding, whether it's for a consultant, whether it's for sort of a data dive, whether it's for a kickoff meeting to launch and assess interest. So there are foundations out there, and you can contact me and I could get folks in touch with the Grant Makers and Aging community.
Great. Well, I know we ran a little bit over time, but thanks so much, everybody, for sticking with us, and appreciate your responses to the questions, and appreciate all the questions in the chat. Before we go, a quick word about our next network meeting, which will take place Tuesday, April 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We will get an update on the workforce-related action plans issued by the Moving Forward Nursing Home Quality Coalition. A great lineup of guests, including Coalition Chair Alice Bonner, Betsy White of the Brown University School of Public Health, Jasmine Travers of the New York University College of Nursing, Jenna Kellerman of Leading Age, and Kezia Scales from PHI. Moving Forward has 2 action plan committees highlighting workforce initiatives, one focused on improving CNA wages and support, including through Medicaid incentive payment programs, and the other on expanding CNA career pathways through the Registered Apprenticeship Framework. Many of those folks I mentioned are leading those 2 committees. Registration for next month's webinar is now open at the URL you see there. I will also send that out later on this week to those of you who are on our mailing list and or who registered for this meeting, along with a link to a recording of today's webinar, and we will eventually post the slides and the recording on our website as well. If you are not on our mailing list but would like to be, please shoot me an email. I'm at sloan@csg.org. Please check out the updates to our website, the National Online Resource Center. Send us any relevant bills or other resources that we may be missing. And please reach out to request CSG technical assistance services if you're looking to put something together like our friends in Hawaii did last month. Thanks, everybody, for joining us again today. We will see you again next month.